really a challenge. And I get very frustrated sometimes because maybe some of my ideas don't work, and I may try half a dozen different ideas, and finally I hit up on a solution. But the really good feeling is when that doll is standing, it's been put on a stand, and you put it up. I always put it up where I can look at it till the customer comes. And you look over there and see what you've done, and you just feel so good. I'm Marty Westfall, and this is my husband, Bud. We want to welcome you to our Antique Doll Restoration Video Workshop. Today we're going to work on 3 different doll heads. You'll learn something from each doll head that we work on. The first thing I want to emphasize is protection of yourself and your customer. This is a repair service order I have used for many years. As you fill it out, you put the customer's name, her phone number, address. In this case, let's imagine it is a bisque doll. On the back of the head, it has the A1M and the words Armin Marceau, Germany. That must always be put on your repair service order. Be sure you make notations of every bit of damage you find on that doll. It has holes in the lower body. The head broken in 3 pieces, and 2 pieces are missing. There is no wig. Make notations of everything. The legs are pin jointed, but they need patching between the cloth and the leather. And all the old dolls need cleaning, so you'd make a note of that. An estimate of cost. In this case, I put $325. You keep the original repair service order and give the customer the carbon copy. Now, these pictures show hidden damage not even suspected by the customer. This doll was brought to me by a lady from Indiana. She had bought the doll at auction and thought it was in absolutely mint condition. A child did come along, grabbed the doll, picked it up, and when the doll was put back down, this arm broke into 3 pieces, as we see here. It was not obvious, of course, with the clothes on, but this arm here was hanging by 1 thread. Might have even dropped off the next time she picked it up. This particular doll was set cross-eyed. The eyes were also about 2 millimeters smaller than they should have been. This photo shows how far back in the head the eyes had sunk, and it also shows the damaged eyelids. She didn't see that when she bought the doll. She had no idea it was in that bad a shape. This is an example of what you should always take a picture of, is the markings on the back of the doll's head. Because when a person comes to pick up the doll, she knows you've taken the pictures. And if she says, that doesn't look like my doll, you just turn it over and show her. There it is. Now this is the hidden damage that was so bad. When we took the head off, the inner lining was only held in place by the glue that was glued up over the shoulder plate. Same way with the front. The front was really in worse shape than the back. So those are examples of hidden damage. Now I'd like to show you several different types of doll heads. These are the kinds you will encounter most often in the restoration business. This is a shoulder head. It's called a shoulder head because the face, the entire head, flows down into the shoulder. Here we have a socket head, so called because this area beneath the chin is shaped in such a fashion that it fits into a depression of a composition body or a porcelain bisque shoulder plate. This is a rubber or plastic or maybe a combination of both neck plug that is normally dropped down inside the head. It either holds the head on a shoulder plate or it's attached to elastic in a composition body. The doll was shipped to me recently, a K-Star 126. It was put on the body with this. The elastic pull was so strong that it had bent the material, and the head would have fallen off had I not caught it. These are not safe to use. The safest thing to use is the same thing that they used in the olden days, a wooden button. There's no way that wooden button will ever come through there. This is a flange neck. And all flange neck dolls fit down into a cloth body that has a casing around the neck area. The flange fits down inside a hole, and the strings or the wire, whatever is used, is drawn tight around this area so that doll head cannot come out, but it can move from side to side. This is the color your old antique dolls started out with, is white. In this case, this one is an unpainted Parian. The antique dolls were made with the white porcelain, and then the flesh tint was added. This is a Parian shoulder head. Many people call this a glass head, simply because it is shiny. It looks like your fine china. The glaze is powdered glass, actually, which is called frit. And they add other materials to it so it will stick to the bisque. Now let's look at the different kinds of doll eyes available on today's market. So here we have what is called the regular glass eye. It is the only kind of eye that can be used to set sleep eyes in dolls. Also, the very cheapest glass eyes. So anyone making German dolls or any kind of doll that has to have sleep eyes, these are the eyes to go with. They are perfectly round. The pupil sits on top of the color. There is no depth to these eyes. This is a similar eye, a little bit more expensive. It cannot be set as sleep eyes because it has a small dome of crystal over the iris and the pupil. If you look at the blue of the iris in this eye, you can see what I call striations. It has a little bit of similarity to the human eye. These are called oval eyes. I call them oval flatbacks because they are flat on the back. These are ideal to set in French fashion dolls or in any doll that has the almond-shaped eyes. This is what we call mannequin paperweights because they were actually used in mannequins, store mannequins, before the plastic eyes were invented. If you'll notice the red veins at each side, that made the mannequins' eyes look more human. And since they are made only in the large sizes, from 30 to 32, we use them only in large dolls. This is an example of the mannequin paperweight when it has been set with the veins above the upper lid here and below the lower lid here. They are beautiful once they're set in a doll's head. No glass eye maker, to my knowledge, has ever produced anything like the antique Bilo eyes. Very tiny irises and tiny pupils, and even the shape of the eye is elongated. Many doll makers start out making the Bilo doll, and yet they say, why doesn't that look like the old? The reason is they have to put eyes in the doll that are made nowadays, and the irises are too big. They just don't look the same. This is the elite of the doll eyes made today. There is a very high dome of crystal on top of these. When you look into a doll's eyes that have the English paperweight set into them, they look so human, almost as though the eyes follow you from side to side. These are signed Steiner eyes. Each eye is signed on the back. The white is made of porcelain and it has a well in the middle. The pupil is painted in the bottom of the well. The color was then applied, and then the striations running out from the pupil. Any store that sells drafting supplies also sells templates such as this. Shows metric circles in millimeters. You can hold this up to the doll, to the socket, the empty socket of the doll, and tell almost exactly what size eyes you want. And if you order some, you can check it very simply by fitting the eye into one of these metric circles. Under the metric circle, it tells you what the millimeter size is. I want to show you a couple of dolls that you might think are lost causes. This is a poor little doll known as Coquette who went through a house fire. Now she looks as though she's ruined. Her shoulder plate's missing. But what I want to warn people against is not to throw dolls like this away, because they can be saved. The owner of this doll had an accident. She hit the doll's head somehow on a hard surface and broke out a large piece of the upper eyelid, and also the doll is cracked from the corner of the left eye down into the cheek and back behind the ear, and we don't know how far up the damage goes in the back, but probably all the way to the crown. So you never know what you're going to get into when you take in a doll like this, because it's fully covered, the body's fully covered. I know it has been worked on before. The clothes are certainly not original. This is a Simon Howbig 1010. So this is really a good doll. We'll take the skirt off. And she has a fancy slip, half slip. And pantaloons. The leather body looks like it's in pretty good condition. Well, there's a good example of a different leather body than what I have here. This, we can tell, was originally pink leather, but has faded over the years. And the fishtail is this area that's stitched into the back and to the front. It's cut in two pieces, and that gives the doll the shapely derriere, and also fixes it so she can sit down. This is one way that shoes can be held on a doll. Often when you're carrying a doll around, unless there is a pin put through the back of the shoe and into the leg, preferably through the seam, you might lose the shoe. So we can take the pin out, pull the shoe off, and remove the stocking. And there's something very interesting about these feet. They have a seam going down through the middle of the foot. It also has sculptured toes. 5 sculptured toes on each foot. The legs are made in actually 3 pieces. We have the upper leg, the lower leg, and the foot. The upper and lower leg are stitched together very crudely after they've been stuffed. And the reason they have the leather bands around the knee area is to hide the crude stitching. The glue that was used to fasten the old wigs was water-soluble. And by the time an old doll reaches the restoration artist, usually that glue has disintegrated till the wigs are very easy to remove. Simply a matter of pulling with one hand and pushing up with the finger. If you have a problem getting an old wig removed from the doll head, get a spray bottle, fill it with water, and spray right along the edge. Let that water permeate the glue just a little bit at a time. You don't want to wet the wig cap. This is the wig cap. Don't want to get this wet, so you just spray a little water at a time until that glue gives way, and then you work all the way around the head to remove that wig. All the old glue, like what I have pulled off here, I remove all that before I'll ever put that wig back on. Our next step is to remove the wig pate, which is made of heavy cardboard and shaped. The end of the X-Acto knife will hardly penetrate that glue, so we may have to cut the whole thing out. Never use water or glue that is not water soluble, because this has been very difficult to remove the glue. We've had to cut around it, and there is slight damage to that pate. But at least now we can see what's inside the head. We see an eye down that has fallen down in the neck area, and I am hoping it didn't break when the owner broke the rest of the doll. That's very hard to get. A person with big hands shouldn't try this. Yeah, I think I got it. Here we go. It didn't break. Will she be happy? And I'm happy too. You don't find new eyes that beautiful. Before we take the head off, we will remove the earrings, because the owner will want to keep them. And we'll put them in the same box with the eyes and the crown, the pate. It's usually very easy to remove the old shoulder head, or if it's a doll with a shoulder plate, by simply running your fingers up under the bisque and pushing inward towards the body. That causes the old glue to give. If you can't get your finger all the way up there, then a craft stick comes in handy. I think most everyone knows where they can buy craft sticks. The thing to remember is to push on the leather or the cloth, whatever the body happens to be, and don't push up in this fashion. You might crack the porcelain. Part of the front is loosened, so we'll go to the back. I tell you, a doll restoration artist cannot have pretty hands or pretty fingers. If you see someone doing this with diamond rings on and lots of fingernail polish, they don't know what they're doing. It's a good idea to examine the edge of the shoulder plate, because if there has been anything broken off, you'll find a sharp edge like we have here. You can see two sharp edges here, which could easily cut into your finger. Above all, don't ever use anything metal to pry that head loose. We got through to something. Bits of plaster that held the other eye in place. Bits of the leather stuck to the shoulder head. When this comes out of the kiln, all of this will have turned to ash. Then we have to wash it in clear water, and I let it air dry. Then we're ready to put it together. We have been soaking this bisque head in an effort to get the one remaining eye out. Hopefully the plaster has soaked up enough water that we can get that out easily. It's not a good idea to use anything metal when you're working on the inside of the doll's head or trying to get an eye out. It appears that those eyes may have been put in with glue before the plaster was put around them. If that be the case, then we'll have to soak it again. We just about have the glass eye cleared of plaster. Apparently, whoever did the original restoration first put glue around the eye socket. That's the reason it has been a little difficult to get out. Let's take a look at the Simon Halvig head now before we kiln fire it to clean it. Let's go over to the kiln now and start the firing process. This is our kiln setter. This is what controls the kiln after we turn the switch to high. Make sure all 3 tongues of the kiln setter are coated with a mixture of flint and water, and that mixture must be heavy. The way I check the underneath side of the center tongue is with a mirror, and we can see the outer edge of that tongue has nothing on it. So we'll have to put a little bit of the mixture on the end. Check it again to make sure we got it. If these 3 tongues are not coated properly, the kiln setter will not turn off. It will keep firing indefinitely and everything will burn down. Make sure none of the flint mixture gets inside the tube. This is called a pyrometric cone, and this is what I use for kiln cleaning the porcelain bisque. Doesn't matter whether it's the bisque, china, or Parian. We still use a cone 018. To load the cone inside the kiln, we pull the weight up, push down on the tongue, and reach inside the kiln and insert the cone. If you're ever in doubt which way to put the cone into the kiln setter, put the flat edge of the cone on the edge of the kiln. Make sure it's flat, and you can see the cone leans in the direction of this index finger. So if you let the cone down like this, this is the direction it must go into the kiln setter. Always put kiln posts on the bottom, and the height of the post depends on how many heads you need to fire. We're putting the kiln shelf down on the posts. This is what we're going to load the heads on. Next, we have to cover the shelf with sifted flint. Pieces that have been glued together will come apart during the firing. They may fall over, and if they do, this acts as a cushion. Since we couldn't get all of the doll heads in the original position, we had to do some rearranging because I have to use a half shelf. The posts must be higher than any of the heads that are in there. Then we add more flint to the half shelf. Incidentally, if you spill flint on any of the doll heads, it doesn't matter. Always fire pieces like these with the white part down. It doesn't hurt if they touch one another. And this is the little doll that went through a house fire, and I have to bed this one in a mound of flint. It's liable to roll off between the shelves and break. We have the heads loaded in the kiln. We're ready to do the kiln cleaning. Final step, turn the switch to low. The lid vented 1 inch. We leave the low switch on for 30 minutes. As the old dirt, glues, whatever has been used on those heads, as that burns out, the fumes can come out where the lid is vented. They can't do damage to the heads that are inside. Okay, our first 30 minutes is up, so we turn the switch to medium. Fire it for another 30 minutes. Now we turn the switch to high. Close the lid and make sure both plugs are in. This means that the heat will gradually build up in the kiln, and you should never, ever leave the kiln any kiln when it's on high. We fired the heads yesterday afternoon to clean them. The procedure we used for firing, we turned the switch on low for 30 minutes with the lid vented 1 inch. After 30 minutes, we turned the switch to medium, the lid still vented, and after another 30 minutes, we closed the lid and turned the switches to high. When the kiln setter kicked off, that meant the heads should be clean. The kiln was allowed to cool overnight. Shall we see what we have? This is our little head that was so black. It was photographed yesterday. This is the one that had been through a house fire. You can see during the kiln cleaning, all of the soot burned off the head. We will have to wash all the heads in clear water to get the flint off. Now we will remove the top half shelf from the kiln posts. The flint, you see, is used over and over again. It must be sifted each time prior to using it. This is what the cone looks like after it has been removed from the kiln setter. The heat within the kiln reached the temperature of 1328 degrees. The cone bent. It allowed the middle tongue to fall down, which automatically shut off our kiln. Flint will not do any damage to your antique dolls. What will damage them is if you fire these doll heads on hydrated alumina or silica sand. I decided to fire this head on hydrated alumina and then take a picture of it and show it in comparison with a head fired on flint, which is what I preach constantly. Use flint to fire not only the antique doll heads on, but the new porcelain. As you can see, it looks almost as though this doll had a glaze on it, which bisque dolls never had. And if you will notice, the eyebrows blistered off. For those who don't have access to a kiln, there is an alternative method of cleaning the doll. Put it in a pan large enough to hold it, cover it with cold water, put it on the burner and bring that water slowly to a boil. Let it boil for several minutes. Then you remove the pieces of the head one at a time to a folded bath towel. We'll use a toothbrush or an X-Acto knife, whatever is necessary to remove any glue that still remains on the broken edges. Now that we have cleaned all the heads by kiln firing, we will work on little Coquette first. If you recall, this was the doll head that went through a house fire. She was totally black. We cleaned her in the kiln. Now she's back to her original colors. What we will do is sculpt a shoulder out of ceramic clay. Ceramic clay can be bought through most ceramic places where they sell regular ceramic greenware. You can buy the clay in large blocks. We first start by rolling a ball of the clay a little bit bigger than we think we'll need. We put it on the turntable in the center. Then we put the doll head in the center of the ball of clay. Now to rotate this, we can see the doll head is leaning backwards. So we move the head in the position it should be in when we finish making another shoulder plate. That means pushing the clay down and shaping it. When we see there is an excess, we simply cut it off. And put it back into the saran wrap. I'm using an old palette knife for this particular work. Later on we will use wooden modeling tools. The front of a shoulder plate always curves outward. So we have to cut part of the clay off in the front. This doll had a very crudely shaped shoulder blade. You cut, you press, you shape until you get it even on both sides, the head straight up and down. This is the rough part, the rough work. Here we need to go to sculpting tools. And this is one of my favorites. Incidentally, sculpting tools can be purchased from almost any art store. I would suggest you use wooden tools because the plastic doesn't work as well as the wood. Too much on this side. Coquette had her head tilted as though she were flirting, so we want to make sure we maintain that tilt. We need more of a curve in the back, not as pronounced as in the front, so we'll add just a little more. This is a matter of adding and taking away and adding and taking away, smoothing down, and finally, when we have roughly the shape we want, we will have to push the clay down to the surface, level with the surface, the white part of the doll, which is the inside. Constantly check to make sure the head is in an upright position as it should be. Also to make sure in this case, Coquette is tipping her head to one side. Now we only want the shoulder plate to come to about this point. So there's two ways of going about this. You can cut off the lower portion of that clay, or you can build clay around it, which is what I prefer to do. Flatten the bottom side of your clay and the top side. The reason for this is when I start adding my mender, what I will build a shoulder plate from, I only want it to come to this level. Now let's see how accurate our measurements are. This is the instrument I use for measuring. The instrument can be adjusted by rolling this wheel down to 5 inches or down to 0. I'm going to measure from the deepest indentation on the doll's neck out to the edge of the clay shoulder I have sculpted, because we want the other shoulder the same distance, the other edge the same distance. Be careful not to disturb the doll's head because this clay is very soft and you can move the doll's head easily. Just a fraction more. Now that we have the measurement, I will lock it in by turning the wheel on the right side of the instrument. We check the measurement on the other side of the doll's head. We put the outer jaw against the deepest indentation, and the lower jaw is almost, the measurement is almost identical to the other side. The next measurement we need to take is front to back. We lock in that measurement. And we check the measurement on this side to see if it corresponds with the one on the opposite side. It may be a 1/16 of an inch off. That small difference can be corrected by pulling the clay in, and we'll recheck that measurement. And there we have it. The next step, we must pull the clay away from the top surface of the doll's head. The object here is to move that clay down the same thickness as that porcelain, because when we build it up with the white mender, we want the mender to be the same thickness as the original porcelain. Touch the wedge to the outer surface of the porcelain, gently bring it down to where the break occurred, and then slip the wedge slightly underneath. This gives us an area we can build up several coats of the mending material. We don't really worry about getting the sculptured clay perfectly smooth, because all we use this for is as a building block or a building basis for adding the shoulder. We want to measure the distance from the flat area here to the indentation on the neck. This is to make sure that while working with the clay, we haven't changed the measurements. We don't want a lopsided shoulder. Okay, we'll lock that measurement in. Check it on this side, and that measurement is still okay. We check to see that the doll head is still upright and that she is still tilting her head as though she's flirting. For our next step, we'll start building the shoulder. I call this a mender because it is used for many, many things. We can build up shoulder plates with it. We can fill in missing pieces. We can fill out a neck socket, strap the neck socket in place, and it is strong enough to hold the elastic necessary. Add just a little bit of water at a time, because if we put too much, the mixture will be too weak. You can't sand it. If you have it too thick, you can't spread it easily. The best way to control the addition of water is with an eyedropper. And this is the consistency we need so it will stand up in peaks. If it runs, throw it out, do it over. And we only mix a little at a time, because when it starts setting up, and this sets up fast, when it starts setting up, you have to throw the rest of it away. You cannot put water with it once it's been mixed. Now you notice in this area here, we put no plaster mender at all in this area here, because that's where the arms will later go. This is getting too thick, so we'll have to throw it away. Mix up more. You have to work pretty fast with this material. The ceramic clay is wet, and it does not pull the water out of our medium as fast as other types of sculpting material would. If that were porcelain clay, it would suck up the moisture immediately, and then what would happen to this mixture I'm applying, it would dry too quick and it would crack. You'd have to do it over again. We've used our second batch of mixture. We'll mix up a third. Not quite so much this time. Add your water, a drop at a time. Remember, you want to get your mixture about like heavy cake dough. A good mix. Scoop it up in a pile. It won't go bad as quickly if you have it in a pile than we start applying it. I always apply the mixture first to those edges I uncovered, because that's where we want the shoulder to fit precisely, or as close as we can get it. It's not always precise. It can be filled in from the outside once the shoulder plate is attached. And our mixture has dried too much. Again. Don't be tempted to dip your palette knife or whatever instrument you're using into water and then to smooth it. You will ruin this mixture if you do that. One more time, maybe we can get the first coat this time. And we'll only mix one palette knife full. I'm not trying to get this super smooth or even slightly smooth on this first coat for two reasons. One, because it will have a second coat applied, and the second reason is because the rougher it is, the more tooth it has. In other words, it will catch and hold the mixture better than if it were very, very smooth. If you see an area sticking up, such as this one here, it is much higher than the original surface. So we can shave off the high point of that. While this is still wet, it's easily trimmed. And here we have another one we might take off. Now, if something like this happens, if you can see the hole here, when I trimmed off the high point, I also pulled off some of the mender, which means another small amount mixed up to fill that in. And if you have to mix a small amount, it's better to put your water off to one side and then pull it towards your mixture. When we're mixing such a small amount as this, if you put one drop in, that's probably a half drop too much. We don't want the clay to dry out too fast, and it will when the air hits it. So we cover the head with plastic wrap. The mender, being kept slightly damp, will not dry too fast, therefore it will not crack. And now we'll start working on the Simon Halbig, putting the two pieces of it together with the spot glue. This is a quick set. It's called no-run super glue, and that's exactly what it is. If you use the watery kind and you're holding pieces together to spot glue from the outside, you cannot hold those joints together closely enough to keep the watery glue from running down into the broken areas. Always start your work in the front of the face, just in case you have a poor fitting job. When you get to the back, the wig will cover it. Of course, we want it to be perfect all the way through, but we start working in the face. In the case of this Simon Halbig doll, it was in two pieces. So we must first fit it together, and we check the fit by running the finger over the crack. And if you turn your head from the crack as you run your finger over it, and if you can't feel that crack, then you know there's a good fit there, so it's ready to spot glue. We move down a little area and we try it again. All the way down, we start at one end of the crack. It doesn't matter which one you start at. We will put the spot glue approximately 3/4 to an inch apart. It depends on the area that you're spot gluing. Now you notice at the eye, I have two spots of glue close together. The one thing you want to avoid is putting too much glue on there, because it takes forever for your glue to set up if you put too much on there. I have applied the glue half on one side of the crack and half on the other. We only want a very tiny amount holding that together. I skipped over the missing chips here. Never put your glue in an area where you will later have to fill in with the mending powder. All the way through to the back, no glue at these chips, but one spot just above the chip here, approximately an inch space between this one and here, and then we put a final drop of glue on the crown. Now, in weather that's very humid, hold those pieces tightly together until you're sure those drops of glue have dried. Coquette has been drying for about an hour, so we're ready now to put the second coat of mender on the shoulder plate we're building. We will build it higher than the surface of the old bisque. The reason for that is to allow for the sanding. Again, I start up next to the shoulder, the broken edges, and bring it down. I work in the same area. And when this is brought from the edge of the break down to the where I want the shoulder plate to end, then I move on to another area, which in this case would be over here. This is a pretty high buildup over the old porcelain. We'll have to make another mix. The consistency should be the same as when you set sleep eyes in a doll, for those of you who are familiar with that process. We start at the broken edge, bring it down to the edge of the shoulder plate, overbuild. I will emphasize you must overbuild to allow strength for sanding. Again, this final coat is just as rough as the first one, so it will take a lot of sanding. We have a very thin area on the front of the shoulder plate and where the arms would go in, so we must make that thicker. It stands to reason if it's thin in this area, it will be thin over here, so we'll add more here. We can always take it off. We don't want to have to add more later. This material we're using here must have time to dry enough that you can sand it. And it does not have its total strength until it's thoroughly dry. In the case of this doll, we will leave it out overnight with no covering on it because I want the clay to dry out, and as it dries out, it will pull moisture out of our mender. Now this looks like a total mess, and it is right now. But when it's sanded, it will be smooth, and we'll have a nice shoulder plate for this little coquette. Let me show you now how we do the strapping inside the doll's head. We cut strips of cotton, some as much as ½ an inch wide, perhaps 3/4 of an inch long. At this point, the spot gluing is holding the broken edges together while we do the strapping from the inside. First, we mix the glue. I always use Elmer's epoxy cement. I use a porcelain glazed tile to mix my epoxy cement on. Squeeze out equal parts of the clear resin and the epoxy hardener. When it's first squeezed out of the tube, one of the tubes puts out a clear, what looks like a clear gel. The other is a darker yellow. Once it's mixed thoroughly, you have a light yellow mixture with no streaks in it. Anything porcelain that we mix the glue on can be later put in the kiln and fired to cone of 18. That will clean the object completely. We take a cotton strap, place it in the glue, and I use craft sticks to press the cotton down into the glue because we want all the fibers impregnated with that glue. Once it's thoroughly covered, I take toothpicks, lift one end of the strap with one toothpick, and if necessary, support the other end of the strap and carry it over to the doll's head. Equal parts of the strap should be on each side of the crack. The craft stick is then used to smooth out the strap. Get it just as smooth as possible. Go on to the next area. The straps should be butted against one another. It doesn't hurt if they overlap. The only place you must be careful about applying straps is in the vicinity of the eyes, because if you get high lumps of the fabric and glue in the corner of any of the eyes will not fit back into the sockets. Once those straps are in place, you can continue to strap the crack all the way down on one side and up the other. Sometimes it takes quite a long time for the epoxy to dry. You may have to dry overnight. Before doing the mending on the face, we must remove the spots of glue. And I do that with my fingernail, not with a knife. A knife will leave black spots. If the doll head has to be taken apart again, you simply fire it in the kiln to cone 018. That burns out all the fabric and the glue, and it also stinks up your studio. Now we're back to the Simon Howbig. I came down into the studio last night to do some mending work and applied the mender. That is what you saw earlier when we built up a shoulder plate on Little Coquette. So you've already seen how to mix it and how to apply it. It took 10 mixings to get all the material you see on the head, a large lump of the material on the eye. On the inside, I applied an extra large lump of material. Anytime you have chips out of the eyes, or in this case, a large piece missing, you must have something on the inside, a roughage that will hold your material in place. As soon as I applied the large amount of mender inside and over the missing eye area, I used the eye sizer to place against the mender, pushed it so that much of the mender came through on the outside. The main purpose in this is to get the socket made before the mender starts to harden. We rotate the eye sizer to form that socket so the eye will fit in later. The sets of eye sizers are available from Sealy Ceramic Service in Oneonta, New York, and Byron Mold Company in Willoughby, Ohio, plus many other doll supply houses. Now we start sanding, and rather than start on another section of the head, I'm going to work on that eye very carefully, because we don't want any of the mender to break out or chip out. We use the garnet paper, 220 grit. It's available at most any hardware store. Use a wedge-shaped sculpting tool, very thin on the edge, and fold the sandpaper over the wedge. Then with your thumb and forefinger, tighten down on the sandpaper so it won't slip. We don't want any of the wood projecting because it might gouge out a piece of the mender. And we start near the eyebrow, because in that area the porcelain is not broken. The object here is to not only get the mender smooth, but to feather it down into this area. Later, if we are successful in sanding this area smooth, and particularly here in the corner where you can see a definite line of demarcation between the mender and the porcelain, then we will trim the eye to make the shape match this eye. When you're working on an area such as this, it's a matter of a very, very delicate touch. And if you feel the sandpaper loosening, rewrap it. It's a good idea to use a motion from the mender towards the porcelain. If you come back from the porcelain onto the mender, and if you exert too much pressure, you could knock out a piece of the mender. As long as you can see powder coming off onto the porcelain, you know your sandpaper is still working. I've been working at this for over an hour now, so let's see what we've accomplished. I started by using the garnet paper, alternating with the 400 grit wet dry sandpaper. The mender must be feathered out in such a manner that when you run your finger over the two different materials, you cannot feel where one ends and the other begins. The area in the eyebrows have been sanded and feathered, and you'll notice that I have saved as much of the antique color as possible. It may need a little touching up with paint later, but we have most of the old color left. The next step is a very delicate operation. Perhaps you can see the pencil line I have drawn. It's not a complete line, it's a broken line. This gives me a rough indication of how this socket must be trimmed to match this socket. This is some of the most tedious and painstaking work you can do. I'm using a surgeon's scalpel. No one watching this video is without some acquaintance in the nursing profession or the medical profession. And I'm sure you could talk them into purchasing a scalpel for you, plus a package of scalpel blades, because for this tedious work, the blade must be new and very sharp. Notice the angle I am holding the scalpel. At this point, I'm not holding it straight. In this position, I am angling it against the dotted lines, or the broken lines that I drew to indicate a rough shape of the socket. And when you feel the blade of that knife catch on a lump of the mender, back off. It's even a good idea, if you hit a tiny lump, which is what I just hit, to take your garnet paper and very carefully smooth out the edge of that lump. If you don't stop when you feel that lump and you push ahead with the blade, you most certainly will break out a piece of the mender. At this point, I have been using the scalpel, but I've decided to start sanding lightly against this mender, because the scalpel could break out a large piece that we don't want to lose. We might have to start over, so the sandpaper is much safer at this point. You not only take away the amount of mender that you want to take away, but at the same time, you're creating a smooth ledge exactly like the other eye has. Don't get too wild with the sandpaper though, because you can do damage with it too. The mender gets particularly thin when you're near the inner corner of the eye, so you must be very careful when you're working in that area not to flake off a piece. There are very few times when you're working on an area such as this where you should hold your sandpaper with the high point down against what you're sanding. If at all possible, hold it in this position where there's no danger of perhaps gouging out a piece. Getting the corner of the eye shaped properly is very important. If you don't get the same shape as we have on this eye, you're apt to have one that's goggly-eyed and the other one that looks natural. Now I'm switching to the 400 grit sandpaper. You may have noticed that I switch backwards and forwards, working up to the pencil marks rather than staying in one place and sanding that down, then moving to another. The reason for that is it's much simpler if you work back and forth and keep those edges as nearly even as possible. Not near as apt to break a piece out. I've tried all kinds of tools, including electric grinders, for sanding, but there's nothing can produce the fine work of simply using your hands and working very carefully. I'm going to try next rolling the sandpaper and rotating it in this corner of the eye to try to make it match this corner. This is not really an inner corner. It's a rounded inner corner. It does not come to a sharp corner. So we must keep working on this inner corner until we get rid of the sharp point there. We're just about to finish up the corner of the eye, and it's only taken about 3.5 hours. And I mention that just to remind you that it takes a lot of patience, a lot of time to do this type of restoration as it should be. Now that we've finished the hard part, let's go ahead to the sanding and feathering of the rest of the mender. It looks as though I put an awful lot of mender, an excess of mender, for such a tiny crack, but there is a reason for that. We want to make sure that crack was filled and make sure that we have enough mender applied that we can feather it out onto this portion, the antique portion. Don't use too much elbow grease, because if you do, you'll remove some of the old paint. We have to be even more careful around the cheek area. I think here I will use the surgeon's scalpel, because we can scrape off a good deal of this and save time without doing any damage to the mender. Remember to hold the blade of your scalpel as flat as possible when you're removing the mender, particularly in the spots close to the crack. Scrape from the mender out toward the porcelain. It's a pretty high point there. I'll take that down partially by sanding. At this point, you have to be really careful about not removing too much mender. If you're not careful, you will gouge into the mender that's in the crack. I have uncovered a portion of the crack at the high crown where the pencil is pointing, and so I can be very careful as I work towards this uncovered area. The areas that I have uncovered are so smooth you can see that the crack is filled with mender. The paint will cover this. There are some areas in this head where the crack, the edges of the crack had chips missing, and so I used a lot of mender to make sure we got all those cracks and missing chips filled in. Any area that you're sure there's no crack, scrape the mender off with the scalpel much faster than trying to sand it. The closer you get to the outside edges where you will want to feather with the 400 grit paper, the lighter should be your touch. We have some ugly holes here, indentations that must be removed. Now remember, we work from the middle of the mender toward the bisque. I find it easier to work one side all the way down to the feathering part and then turn the head and start on the opposite side rather than doing them both on both sides. Let's put aside the Simon How-Big now and turn to another head where I will illustrate the blending of paints, use and care of the airbrush. I'll show you what has been done to this doll head. I want to paint it for you. The strapping has been done on the inside. The outside has been filled, as I showed you on the Simon How-Big. It's been sanded. Now it's ready for painting. It was originally in 3 pieces with a number of missing chips, and in this case we had a piece totally missing. Under the chin there was also pieces missing. I do think this is a very old doll. It's called a turned head too, in the fact that it is slightly turned in this direction. This is called Frisket Mask Liquid. Its purpose is to protect all of the old color on the antique dolls. In the case of this head, I will apply it to the eyebrows, the eyelashes, the 2 red dots in the nose, the mouth, the teeth, probably on part of the cheeks. When it dries and we do the airbrushing, if any of the airbrush paint should drift, it will not get onto the old paint. It's very important to work soap into the bristles of your brush. Otherwise, one time of application of Frisket and the brush is ruined. Whereas if you put soap in the bristles, you can swish it out in water and your brush is as good as ever. Makes you want to blow your nose, doesn't it? While we're waiting for the Frisket to dry, let's mix up some paints. We use a Dr. P.H. Martin's paints because after trying many, many different kinds over the years, these are the only ones I have ever found that give the soft, beautiful matte finish of the old bisque dolls. These are the colors I will use to blend into the flesh color on the doll we're going to paint. Is Suntan, Flesh 1, Spectrum Yellow, True Blue, Spectrum Red, White, Chocolate Brown, and Dark Walnut. Now, we may not need all those colors, but I always start out with this lineup. Another color that's very important is the powdered pigments. This is yellow red that I grind in with my colors because in the old days they didn't have the fine china paints we have today. This is one of the colors they originally used. We have the colors ready for mixing. I'm using Suntan, Flesh 1, True Blue, Spectrum Yellow, an equal amount of white, the same amount of white as I have Suntan because we work back and forth between those 2 colors. Then we have Chocolate Brown and Dark Walnut. We may not need the last 2, but we have them ready if we do need them. In the center well, mineral pigments I mentioned earlier, yellow red. So this will be our main mixture. I'll pick up part of the Flesh 1 and add to the main mixture. And I can already see that is a little bit yellow. We'll pick up some of the yellow red. This is actually china paint. This is what I use my main color when I'm making reproduction dolls. This is what I use on the cheeks because an experiment I made many, many years ago matching today's colors to the old dolls. Yellow red was the one that most closely matched. Takes quite a bit of this to add to the color. Let's see what that looks like on the doll. Now there's a peculiar trick about these paints. What you put on here at first does not look the same after it's dry. When I pat it out like this to allow it to dry more quickly, you can see this color is already too dark. We'll lighten the color with white. Actually, off camera, when I am checking my colors, I'll put a dab of color like this, and then I'll walk away for 2 or 3 minutes and come back and look at it. That is the safest way to know whether your colors match or not. This needs just a touch of blue, I believe, to bring it to the color of this old doll's flesh. Now, although that's not completely dry, you can see that it does darken as it dries. I believe we got a perfect match here. Now let's do some airbrushing. That's the easy part. I'd like to explain a little bit about this particular airbrush. It is an AB double action made by Pache. All of my airbrushes are by Pache. This is the only one I have found that will do the fine work necessary to save as much of the old paint as possible and just merely cover the restoration. Here we have the air blast tube. This is where the air comes out when we push down on the finger lever. The finger lever, as you see, is at an angle. When we push down with that angle, that starts the flow of air from the air blast tube. As we pull back, we'll see the needle starts coming down in front of the air blast tube. Now, if you pull the lever too far back, you can see that needle comes out almost 1/4 of an inch. That is for broad coverage. For coloring tiny areas, we want to control that by letting the needle come out just in front of the air blast tube as you see it here. The needle is almost as thin as a hair. You must be very careful in using the airbrush not to let the point of that needle hit anything, because if you do, it's ruined. We direct the color by pointing this air blast tube towards the area we want to paint. Not in this manner, but like so. If I were painting this brush, I would point the air blast tube directly at the brush. That way, when you pull back on the finger lever, there's no way in the world the point of that needle can hit anything. If you make a mistake and point it like this, and you're doing close work, it would ruin the point of the needle. I apply white paint to the repair. That is my first step. We apply the white paint so the old colors will not have any effect on this new color we've mixed. See, you have your old color was applied to white porcelain. And I only use 1 drop at a time. I load the brush. After stirring the paint, I put 1 drop in the color cup. It runs down into where the needle will feed it out in front of the air blast tube. So we'll start up here at the crown. This is one exception to the rule where you go back and forth over the mend instead of around in a circle, which is the way we'll do when we color it. 1 drop goes a long way. The reason I only use 1 drop at a time is because as it's pulled through, as the color is pulled through in front of the air blast tube, I find that it dries out, as you can see down in there in the color cup. Now it's beginning to dry out with only 1 drop. I may have to stop and clean the airbrush before we do the whole thing. We'll try another drop. We have 1 crack towards the eye. This one goes right up to the crown. Here we have another one to the crown. One more time. And there we have our white paint. I try to remove most of the paint before I use the airbrush cleaner. I also use tweezers to lift that tiny needle out of its slot. The paint has already caked on the needle. Now, without the needle in the slot, I can be fairly rough in pulling the paint out. This is the Spectralite airbrush cleaner, and it is the best thing in the world to clean your airbrush with when you use these particular colors. Now we'll clean the tip of the needle. I put the airbrush cleaner in a well of the palette and clean it with my fingers until I get all the white off. To put the needle back in place, we first put the crooked part into what's called the walking arm. There's a tiny hole there in the walking arm. The needle then goes under the needle guide, which is this part here, and then the tip of the needle is lifted up and inserted back into its groove. I want to make sure the needle is inserted properly. If it's not, you don't have something in front of it to protect it. It'll fly clear across the room, or if you had your hand in front of it, it could embed itself in your hand. So I hold a Turkish towel or something soft in front of the airbrush, depress the finger lever, pull back on it. That starts the motion of the needle. And if the needle stays in, you're in business. Now we'll finish cleaning the airbrush. I put a few drops of the airbrush cleaner in the color cup, depress the finger lever, pull back on it, and this runs the airbrush cleaner through the hole which feeds the color into the needle. One way to drain it quickly is to hold a soft sable brush in the area where that needle is coming through. Be sure you don't let the needle touch the metal on the brush. stir the paint, get it mixed thoroughly. We put 1 drop of color into the airbrush. And start our decoration. And I do this in a circular motion. Here's another drop. That chin's hard to get to. And you can see how this has already begun to darken on this side. The paint looks too light when it's applied, but as it dries, it gets darker. And the only way you can make sure you have an identical match is, as I said earlier, paint some of it on the face, on the actual skin tone, walk away, let it dry. One more drop should do it. What does that make? 3 drops, I believe. This would be my 3rd coat. Which amounted to 3 drops of the actual color. These short blasts are to feather the new color out onto the old. Feathering can be done 2 ways. You can either do it by pulling back, like this. That starts the concentration of color down against the restoration, and as you pull back, it feathers it out on both sides. Or you can give it short blasts, like this, and use a wrist movement on both sides. And when that dries, that should complete our coloring. Just as soon as you finish painting the repaired area, don't answer the phone, don't talk to your husband, don't talk to anybody. Clean that airbrush. It'll last you a lifetime if you take care of it. I'm going to try to match the color of the cheek now. We'll take the frisket off, and that's simply taken off by starting to roll one end of it, and then you pull the rest of it off. That's just like rubber. We'll mix the color for the cheeks now, and I use as a base the same color I applied over the areas that were restored. To that base color, I add the mineral pigment, yellow-red, because the cheeks they're not really red, they're more of a rust color. And that is the color of the yellow-red that I use. Very delicate color, so we don't want to get it too dark. We need just a little bit more of the yellow-red. A little water. Still not red enough, so we'll take a little more yellow red, dry pigment. And more water. And we still don't have the right color. So I have a mixture of yellow and red I made earlier. We'll stir it up a bit and add some of that color to our base. Discouraged when you're trying to mix colors because it takes what seems like an extra long time, because this is very tedious. And I sometimes spend hours and hours mixing, throwing away, mixing some more. Sometimes I just throw it away and quit for a little while. Let's try this color. That looks like it's a pretty good match. Okay, we're finished with the cheeks, coloring the repair. I do want to mention the white area here on the top. Since it was white originally, I put no color on it. I leave the dolls in as original a condition as I possibly can. In the old days, the heads were sometimes dipped to get the flesh color on. Then these heads had to be refired. And many times you can see where the heads were picked up. The fingers pull the paint off. Let's see what we can do to pretty up little Coquette. While I was working on the Simon How Big, my husband Bud he was a pretty good scout. He did the extra work on Coquette. He sanded down the mender, very carefully removed the clay, and now we're ready to paint. I put Frisket all over the head because I wanted to save all the original colors. Down close to where the new shoulder plate joins the jagged edge of the broken neck, it was almost a pale, almost an off-white, just a tinge of pink. We need to add some more color. Or I believe in this. Still a little bit too pink. One nice thing about these colors, if you immediately wash them off, you'll have no problem. But if you let them set, it almost takes sandpaper to get them off. Now let's go back to the Simon How Big head. Isn't she beautiful now? But it took 3 times of doing the head over, applying new mender, sanding, thinking it was right. Now here's how it looked the first time. I said, nope. Once you spray flesh-colored paint onto a repaired area, if you don't have it sanded right, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And there's not a thing you can do about it except start over again. It happens to everybody. If you're a true doll restoration artist, you can't quit. It'll always draw you back to it. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I really hope you've learned a lot from it. We've enjoyed making it. We've had a lot of fun. And I hope whatever knowledge you take from this video, that you will help someone else with something that they don't know. Thank you.